Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
A Cautionary Tale by Sharp Butterknife. This happened quite a few years ago. I had an affinity for a particular white substance in the form of lines back then. One very cold, snowy night around 11 p.m., I went for a walk to meet my dealer. I'd never been to his place before, so he gave me the address to his small two-story apartment building with maybe 6 units in it. Upon arrival, I noticed several strangers inside. After they'd hit their pipes, 2 clearly unwashed guys came over to sit at the dining table while I waited for my G. I've never smoked anything besides weed and cigarettes, and I was instantly uncomfortable. They tried making small talk, but I grew increasingly uneasy, giving only short and vague answers. I quickly paid for my stuff, grabbed the baggie, and got up from the table. And that's when one of the guys offered to walk me home. My heart started to sink, and I politely declined. "Oh, I'm okay, thanks. I don't live far," I said. The other guy stood up. "No, really, we can walk you. We don't mind. We have to get going anyway." That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I became very aware and very scared. I immediately thought I'm fully dressed and ready to go, but they still had to put their coats and shoes on. If I left right then, I would get a head start and quickly disappear. They said something else as I headed for the door, but I pretended to take a phone call, waved goodbye to my dealer, and closed the door behind me. I jogged down the hallway to the outside door, and once I got outside, I ran for the street. I decided to not take the fast route home because from the building they'd be able to see me. I didn't want them knowing even the slightest direction I lived in if they really were following me. The building was at the end of a street, so instead of going straight up the hill, the way I had initially come from, I turned right and started jogging. I kept glancing back, and finally I saw them, about a block behind, following me. The street I needed, Stanley Street, was across the intersection on my left, about another block ahead at a 4-way light. As I approached the intersection, I noticed the corner house on my right. There was an older man sitting on his porch smoking, and I recognized him. He was another dealer I had met only once a few weeks before when my usual guy was dry. I choked up as I got to his porch and asked if he remembered me. He did and asked, "What's wrong?" I quietly told him, "I think these 2 guys are following me," and then asked if I could go inside for a minute until they passed. He didn't hesitate. We went inside, past his front living room and into the kitchen, where I explained what happened. He told me to not worry, that I was safe there and I could stay as long as I needed to. Then we heard a knock at the door, and I started to panic. He went to the door, looked through the peephole, and yelled, "Just a minute." He came back quickly and whispered that he knew the guys and was going to invite them in to have a hit. He told me to sneak out through his back door, which was beyond the kitchen, go to the right of the yard and find the gate, and that would lead to a side street. He instructed me to creep along the side of his house, close to the shrubs, and check the porch to make sure that they went inside. I followed his plan, and when the coast was clear, I didn't jog. I sprinted up Stanley Street and zigzagged all the way home. When I think back now, I'm in disbelief at my actions and how foolish I was. I thought I was invincible, and I was far too trusting. But I truly thank God for the man who helped me that night. I don't know what those 2 guys wanted from me, but I'm forever grateful I never had to find out. The Boogeyman by It's Pixie. The story I'm about to tell you happened a few years ago. I was 13 at the time, and I'm 26 now, and this still haunts me to this day. I've stayed with my parents in a quiet suburb in South Africa. I grew up in that house, and my parents still stay there. I remember waking up in the early morning hours, feeling panicked and scared. It felt like someone was watching me, like I wasn't alone. I didn't move, but scanned the room with my eyes. I didn't see anything, and I closed my eyes and prayed. Soon after, I fell asleep again and didn't think much about it. A few days passed and nothing happened. But then one night I woke up again with the same fear and panic. I looked around the room, and that's when I saw it. It was sitting on my desk in front of my bed. It was small, like the size of a garden gnome. It had yellow eyes and sharp little teeth and pointed fingers. It just stared at me, and I've never felt so scared in my life. I screamed, and my dad came to my room, and as soon as he put the light on, the creature was gone. My dad didn't believe me when I told him what I had seen. He thought it was just a bad dream, but it felt so real. I know I was awake, and I know I saw it, and it saw me. I slept in my parents' room for the rest of that night. But now I was scared to go to bed, to be alone in my room at night. I could always feel something watching me. This thing also started to scratch the underside of my bed at night. One night I woke up and saw the creature sitting on my desk again, staring at me and smiling, the most evil smile I've ever seen. I was frozen with fear, and this went on for years. My parents just thought I had an overactive imagination and had watched too many scary movies. They didn't take me seriously. Whenever I saw this creature, I just covered my face with my duvet. I prayed and hoped I would fall asleep quickly. And it seemed like it didn't like that. I ignored it. And things got worse. I would see him sitting at my desk, and I would close my eyes and cover my face, but I knew he was still there. I could feel him watching me. I then felt him jump onto my bed, and I didn't dare move. Again, I'd never been that scared in my life. I just laid there. I could feel him scratching my arm, and I screamed, and my dad came in and put the light on, and again the creature was gone. I slept in my parents' room again, but the next morning I found 4 scratches on my arm. My parents were convinced I'd done it to myself in my sleep. I told a friend what had happened, and luckily he believed me. He told me the thing obviously thrived on my fear, and that I should sleep with a Bible under my pillow and tell it to go away. So I tried that. I could still feel him sometimes watching me, but I never saw him again. I was 16 at the time. But this is when it gets creepier. I was doing much better, and 2 years had passed without any incident. I was 18, and I had stayed over at a friend's house, and we'd all slept in front of the TV. Her boyfriend suddenly screamed in the early hours, and I woke up, and I could feel the creature looking at us. I knew it was there. "The Boogeyman is here!" her boyfriend screamed over and over again. I ran to put the lights on, and that's when her boyfriend described the creature, the same creature that I had seen when I was younger. And then I saw the small scratch marks on his arm, and that freaked me out. I had spent so long trying to convince myself that what I had seen wasn't real. Has anyone else seen anything like this before? What the hell is it? As I mentioned, I'm 26 now, and since that night, I haven't seen or felt that creature again. What I Witnessed by Constant Rutabaga. Here's my story, and I'm trying to find anyone who has had the same encounters. When I was around 5 years old, I was desperate to have a sleepover in my brother's room, because my 2 older brothers were in there. They were going to stay up, watch cartoons like Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and most likely watch a film and eat snacks. My brother told me a hard no, and I started to cry, and my mom came upstairs to see what was going on. As I ran to my mom, time slowed right down. It felt like it froze. In front of my brother's bedroom door, standing right in front of him, was a diamond-white gold light that was growing larger. I felt static electricity flow through my body. As I turned back to my mom, time sped up again, and the light disappeared. My brother suddenly said I could have a sleepover in his room, but I was so petrified by what I had encountered that I didn't want to go. I stayed with my mom and dad that night. Fast forward 2 years, when I was 7 years old. I went to stay at my grandparents' house for the weekend, and when going to bed at roughly 9 p.m. that night, I couldn't sleep, most likely due to the fact that I wasn't in my own home and bed. I had the bedroom lights on and the landing light on because I was scared of the dark. As I was trying to get comfortable and go to sleep, I needed to use the bathroom. As I got out of bed, the bright diamond light appeared again, once again right in front of the doorway. The light got bigger as I moved closer to it, and the static electricity flowed through my body again. But this time, I saw a female figure within the diamond light, which was roughly 1.5 meters away from me. She spoke in my head, "Don't be afraid." I ran through it, opened the door, and ran straight downstairs, sobbing to my grandparents, who rang my parents to come and collect me. Now fast forward 25 years later. I now have a family, a wife, and 2 beautiful girls. One morning around 6:30 a.m., I was having breakfast with my family when my 4-year-old said, "Dad, what's that in the sky?" My wife and I looked out of our patio doors and peeked up at the sky, and to our astonishment, there was a black saucer-shaped object hovering there. It was about the length of a bus and roughly 400 or 500 meters above the ground. I ran outside with my phone to take photos and videos. What happened next frustrated me. My phone, which had over 50% battery, died. I told my wife to grab her phone, but hers had died too. Another thing that I noticed was the eerie silence. Our house is situated near woodlands, so every morning and evening you can always hear the birds singing. But on this morning, there wasn't a single chirp or song, just an eerie silence I can't describe unless you experience it for yourself. The craft was slowly moving up and down, and suddenly it vanished into the clouds. As soon as it disappeared, there was an enormous roar of sound from the birds as if every bird had woken up at once. It was quite literally deafening. I still talk to my daughter about the incident today. She's now 8 years old and remembers it very well. My wife, however, doesn't like to talk about it, especially in public settings, as she's a teacher. My daughter has also said she's seen an egg-eyed man in her room. She now sleeps with a light on. She doesn't know what an alien looks like, but she described it as smaller than her, with freckly white skin and black egg-shaped eyes. I've asked her when she's seen him, but when I do, she goes quiet and doesn't tell me. She just says, "That's why I sleep with the light on now." My younger daughter, who is 4, has also been wetting the bed at night, saying that there was a little boy in her room. This happened just before my eldest started sleeping with the light on. I have a terrible feeling that they are being taken at night. I've obviously not told my wife that because she would think I'm going mad. But thankfully the bedwetting has stopped now, and my eldest is sleeping without the main light on. Now she just has a bed light. But I am honestly sure this won't be the last that I hear of this. I wanted to tell someone what was going on to get this off my chest because every time I mention it, people think I'm crazy. But I'm not. This is what has actually happened, and I'm sure it won't be the last time for me or my family. Has anyone else out there had the diamond light experience as a child? Or has anyone else had their kids describing things that they shouldn't know about? Home Alone by Ugly Panned. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood, the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before that, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. I would get dropped off around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home around 4:30. Not that big of a deal. That day, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, around 7, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even be dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got on my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. That day it was just me and my friend Seth. We were playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. No one should have been there until like 7, and my house is set up to where my upstairs has windows that overlook my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than I was expecting. I looked outside. There was a red truck parked there. No one I knew drove a red truck. The person had pulled into the middle of my driveway, sideways, like he owned the place. When I looked out the window, I saw a man with a hat wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so no one should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to my front door. I thought maybe it was one of my dad's friends, or someone my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if someone was going to be coming over. Soon after, I heard a knock at the door, and then another. I went to the other window that had a better view of the walkway up to my front door, and I saw the guy walking back down the walkway. I switched and went back to looking through the windows overlooking the driveway, relaying all of it to Seth. I still had my mic on. I told Seth that he was walking back to his truck, but instead he walked past his truck and tried to open my garage side door. At that point, my heart sank. I told Seth that this guy just tried to get into my house, and mind you, it was literally broad daylight, 5 p.m. Luckily, the garage door was locked, because sometimes we forgot to lock it. After the guy tried the door, he started walking to my back patio. I dropped my headset and I quietly ran down the stairs to see what he was doing. I got downstairs and stood behind the wall so I wasn't visible from the back door and living room windows. I just listened. I heard him try to open the door, and then I heard a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At that point, I was more scared than I've ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet, and the only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross my living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I did. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner, and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on and told Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I was telling him that, I heard a car door shut. This time when I looked out the window, the guy finally got into his truck. I looked at the truck closer and noticed the only thing he had in the truck bed was a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes, and during that time Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate, but the way he was parked, I couldn't see it. Then the guy drove backwards out of my driveway and went down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I got to the back door and saw that the doormat had been moved. Both big plant pots had been moved as well. He had been looking for a key. Holy fuck, we had a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he checked under. I went to the front porch, and all the pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I would have done if he had been able to find the key, or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. And when my dad got home, he had a cop come over, and I told him what happened too, and gave him a description. The guy, never came back. That Wasn't Her Dad by For Falcor. I had a soccer friend who had a haunted house. Maybe there was something about our neighborhood, but I had experiences in my house and she in hers, though I didn't know that until later. And one night I saw the spirit in her house at the same time she did. My friend Liz had a grouchy stepdad, like the kind of guy that comes home from work tired and wants to sit in front of the TV drinking beer with no one talking to him until dinner. He didn't like loud kids either, so I usually didn't get to hang out at Liz's house. He didn't yell or do anything physically, but he would get annoyed and tell us to keep it down or go outside to play. That was pretty normal for that time period. I knew that Liz fought with her stepdad, and I knew she switched rooms a lot. The house was big with rooms upstairs and downstairs. Her stepdad didn't like all the room switching or staying up late listening to loud music or watching loud TV with the lights on. He worked long hours and wanted good sleep. My friend would be nervous telling me about this, but I thought her stepdad was just a jerk, or they were butting heads like so many of my 12 and 13-year-old friends were doing with their parents, though he had always been nice to me. One weekend, her stepdad was out of town, and I wanted to stay the night at her house. We always stayed at mine. And finally, she reluctantly agreed if I would be okay with sleeping on her floor in a sleeping bag. I said sure. We stayed up late watching TV, and Liz was nervous. She kept looking over her shoulder, and I'd look but didn't see anything. She kept asking if I wanted to just go back to my house, but no, I didn't. Her mom let me watch hours of TV, and mine did not, and her mom made us all the popcorn we wanted. Then I was getting really tired and wanted to go to sleep, but Liz was very reluctant to go to sleep. Finally, we went to her bedroom, and I got in my sleeping bag, and she made a big deal out of closing her bedroom door, like making sure it was closed, checking multiple times if it was latched. I took my glasses off and fell asleep in my sleeping bag, and Liz stayed up with the light on watching TV. Something woke me up. I could feel an angry energy in the air. I opened my eyes and saw a man standing in the doorway. I wore glasses and couldn't see him clearly, but I thought it was just her stepdad. The angry feeling got stronger and stronger, and this figure just stood there in the open doorway. I could see he was wearing a hat with a rounded top. I think it's called a bowler. And he was wearing loose brown pants when I'd only ever seen Liz's stepdad wear jeans. I looked over at my friend. She was huddled under the covers on her bed, with the blankets over her head, peeking out at her stepdad in the doorway. I could see the blankets shivering, she was so scared, and I decided to just pretend I was asleep because her stepdad had clearly come home early and was angry that I was there. I peeked a few more times, and the man was still there, staring at us, radiating anger. Finally, I peeked one more time, and he was gone. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next day, Liz and her mom were already having breakfast when I woke up. Her mom had made pancakes, and as her mom was getting me a plate from the kitchen, I leaned over and apologized to my friend for annoying her stepdad. Liz looked startled and asked me what I meant. I was explaining about her stepdad getting back early and being angry that I was there, and Liz started to look frightened, and then looked at her mother. Her mom said that her stepdad wasn't back yet. I started to say of course he was. I'd seen him come into the bedroom door the night before. Liz started shaking her head at me, looking freaked out. Liz's mom looked from me to Liz and got mad at Liz and started chastising her for her stories, for telling me stories, and for continuing to talk about that man after she had been told not to. Liz was sent to her room without breakfast, and Liz's mom explained to me about Liz and her supposed stories about an angry man who watched her, and was angry that they were there, no matter which room she slept in. He would stand in the doorway and glare at her. Later, I tried to talk to Liz about it, but she wouldn't talk about it, and just continued to sleep over at my house when she could. I told her about the spirit that I thought was at my house, and she asked if it was angry, and I said I didn't think so. She said that was okay then. I saw her stepdad standing in a doorway sometime later, and realized he was much, much taller than the man in the bowler hat and brown pants. I mentioned all of this to her mom years later after they moved, and her mom admitted that one day she had seen the guy too, and that he was a deceased relative who had never been in that house, but he'd been angry at Liz's mom for moving into that house away from him, and that he blamed Liz because he thought she was the reason they had moved. Liz's mom also confessed to seeing floating balls of light and shadow figures around Liz. I asked why they hadn't moved or why she didn't stand up to Liz's stepdad, and she just said she couldn't afford to. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she said she tried, but her husband wouldn't listen, so she had just hoped it would go away when Liz got older. When the relative had passed away, they had inherited some of his belongings. They were in the basement, and I had always felt cold and watched in that room. There was also a rumor that someone had killed themselves in that house, but my stepdad, who'd lived in that neighborhood 40 years, had never heard that one. Light in the Sky by Sean. My whole life I've suffered from sleep-related issues. I'm a 26-year-old male, and around 8 years ago, something really strange happened. When I was really young, my sister passed away. Her death spiked a number of issues with me. The main issue was sleep. I'd become so scared of death I'd carry weapons to bed and lay stiff as a board, falling victim to the horrors of my own imagination. My condition consisted of mainly night terrors and sleep paralysis. My mother is an amazing human being. She's very spiritual and very caring. When I was young, she'd give me dream catchers to help with my nightmares, and I also recall her giving me a ring with an eye to watch over me as I slept. My mother has made some very strange claims in her life. She's actually been on the BBC radio and mentioned in a few books based on some of her experiences she's had under the premise of spiritual or supernatural happenings. But what I saw that night didn't feel like either. My mother claimed to have had a spiritual awakening, which to some degree I believe in. One day she was normal, and the next she had changed. I remember being at school waiting for her to pick me up, but she was late. We were in the car when she finally arrived, and she was struggling to drive. She explained that she just had to pull the car over at a local supermarket because of this spiritual awakening. Naturally, since dealing with nightmares, I'd become aware of things seeming very real when actually they're not. Therefore, I'm quite the skeptic when it comes to things of this theme. But she had changed. My mother had unlocked knowledge. Since that day she became extremely smart. She had an answer for everything. Her emotions had leveled, and her mind became unbelievably sharp. Don't get me wrong, she was still herself. She was just a smarter, calmer version. With this new knowledge of hers came new solutions to problems, one of which being my night terrors. She explained that she could teach me to lucid dream, meaning that I'd be aware that I was dreaming and take control, and she did exactly that. It started with listening to a man's voice on a CD and setting triggers. Basically, I'd touch the tips of my fingers until I'd fall asleep. Eventually, something strange happened. I committed to my usual practice until I nodded off, and I remembered looking down at my hands and noticing I was standing up. I was in the middle of a desert filled with old shipping containers. Then and there, I knew I'd finally done it. I was awake while asleep. Soon, though, I realized controlling my dreams wouldn't be as easy as I thought. Every thought that popped into my head fabricated before my eyes, and before I knew it, there was too much going on to comprehend. I remember walking into a container and thinking, "It's too quiet. I wish there were some other people here." and instantly appeared two lifeless, dead-eyed, still-cold men. As my brain exploded into confusion and fear, the men were torn apart violently, and I woke up in a cold sweat. My theory is that I couldn't create people because I was trying to create people whom I'd never met. You can't invent a person from thin air. Whatever is making it needs references. I could go on for hours about my various experiences, but I'll cut to the chase. The light in the sky was something weirder than normal. One night, I'd fallen asleep under the normal practice of touching my fingertips. But this time, when I'd gained control of my sleep, I wanted to roam around my house. Since I know my home well, I assumed less would go wrong. I was touching my fingertips until I drifted into thought, and then realized I'd stopped. So I began doing it again. And then I realized I was already asleep, and I was still in my house. Basically, things had gone to plan, and all seemed normal at first, and I could see my sleeping body on the bed. Things looked relatively similar, but my brain had made some changes to colors and the type of furniture I had. There was one major difference, though. There was a light in the sky. I could see it through my window, a very bright, deep blue light. The light glared from the sides as if I had a visual stigmatism. At first I didn't think too much of it since I've seen weirder things in my dreams and decided to venture through the house. I began by opening my door and walking down the stairs. My staircase led down into the living room that was connected to the dining room. The two rooms were separated by an open archway. I stood at the bottom step and looked through both rooms to see my mother in her dressing gown staring at the light through our patio doors. Confused, I walked over and stood beside her to get a closer look when the unthinkable happened. I heard the words, "It's woken you up too?" I looked to my left, and my mother was looking me dead in the eyes as if nothing unusual was happening. She clearly saw the light and heard the faint buzzing emitting from it, but two things made this scenario make no sense at all. Two things made this situation feel unsafe. First of all, I was not there. I was asleep in my room. I wasn't there. I had made this house in my head. The second thing was something I mentioned early. I cannot make people. I was completely incapable of thinking up a person. I don't know why, but whenever I was in control, I couldn't make a person that didn't simply resemble a dummy. I then, as if within the blink of an eye, woke up, and it was the next morning. I concluded that I was able to conjure my mother up in my dreams simply because I knew her well enough. I went downstairs to make myself a coffee, and there she was in the kitchen, wearing the same dressing gown. She looked at me and said, "Did you sleep all right? That weird light kept me up all night." I mentioned that it was weird and asked if she'd ever figured out what it was. She had no idea. To this day, I've never told her that I was actually in bed asleep that night. I'm sure she would just tell me I'm remembering it wrong, but I know for a fact that I was asleep. Island Trafficking by Anonymous. I've been reading a lot of stories and wanted to share one of my own, for the only reason to maybe help people see signs of trafficking. I'm a 27-year-old man, and this happened this year in 2024 over the summer. In Ohio, there is a huge tourist location called Put-in Bay and Kelly's Island. A lot of people go to these spots to get really drunk and hang out with friends. You have to take a ferry to get to either location, and it tends to be a really fun time. My wife and I went there this summer with a few friends and got an Airbnb on the islands. While we were at Kelly's, we stopped at a bar to get a couple of drinks. My friends and I are pretty social, so while at the bar we started talking to this couple that seemed fairly nice. Later, to find out that these two people we were talking to were up to something very nefarious. They both seemed very friendly. this strange girl seemed relatively average-looking, spending a lot of time with two girls in our group, one of which was my wife, the other my friend's wife. The strange guy was chatting up the guys, about 5 of us, telling us about his old occupation in Europe as a soccer referee. The strange guy was buying all of our drinks and laughing with us, and being someone who went to college, I'm very used to watching drinks to make sure they go straight from the bartender into people's mouths. Me and my friends are also very adept to handle our liquor, and me and my friend were constantly checking on our wives. Eventually, the guy asked us to play volleyball, so we got the ball from the bartender, and I insisted we all play. I walked over there with a couple of friends, and that's when things started to get a little odd. The girls and a couple of our friends were seemingly reluctant to play volleyball. They were too far away for me to hear their conversation, and that went on for a minute while I was watching them the whole time. That's when I noticed that it was starting to get somewhat late, and we all needed to be catching our ferry soon. I went over to the group at the bar with the group waiting to play volleyball, and that's when my wife cued me in onto what was going on, quietly. My wife told me the strange girl was trying to get our wives to go to another bar on the island to get some tequila, and how strangely persistent she was trying to do so. I tried to calm her down and told her that the strange girl was just being friendly, but then I told the group it was time to start heading towards the ferry, which we were early for, and then invited our new friends to join us at the bar by the ferry. Our friends were excited to join us and said they were going that way anyway. We then packed up our golf carts that we'd rented and headed to the new bar. Oddly enough, the strange couple didn't follow us, and we never saw them again. Once out of earshot, me and my friends started discussing the strange couple. Thankfully, our wives were aware of the red flags those two were giving all of us, and we talked about how they were trying to separate the girls and take them to a bar that we found out was actually closed at the time, and how persistent she was trying to do so. How they were both foreign and very aggressively trying to get us all drunk. The weird mannerisms and bailing out at the last second, even though they told us they would join us. We were convinced that they were trying to traffic the girls by the end of the conversation. I know this isn't all that scary of a story, but trafficking is becoming more and more common, and everyone should be careful. Strange foreign couple at the bar, but I can't remember the names of. I hope we never meet again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. Got a true scary story that you'd like to hear me narrate? Email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Give it a thumbs up if you've got the time to do that. And leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. Follow me on social media. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel a little bit further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. There's a link to my TeePublic storefront down there too. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.